Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host, as always, Professor Prime. so, um, this video is part of an ongoing series that I have called Math in the World, where I look at how math relates to different subjects, different interests for people, and different mediums and things along those lines. Recently, I started something new where I did like math in a franchise, and I did that on Dragon Ball, and that was fun for me. And here I'm doing it on Pokemon. It's an incredibly interesting franchise. I grew up on it. I was actually like 11 when I got to play it for the first time, which you know was quote unquote age appropriate. So I kind of started at that right age where I was like the age or about the age of most of the main characters and how they start off in the game, and about the same age as Ash because he was like 10, so I had a year on that. So I think that was like pretty cool. And I don't know which one came first, the video game or the anime. But it's like they're both good, and I got into both around the same time. I can tell you that it wasn't the card game first because that came later. But that was weirdly big for a while. It still happens though, like playing of the card games. But we'll talk about that a little later. So with this video, I want to talk about how math relates to Pokemon. How is math used in Pokemon? And the short answer is just like, oh my god, it's used all the time. But that wouldn't be a very good video if I just left it at that, though, right? So I want to talk about how like math is used in Pokemon. Like, how is it used as we're like playing it? How is it used within that world to impart information? Um, but also, how is it used in the creation and things along that line? And how's it kind of just seen in the meta narrative? So yeah, I want to kick it off by talking about the video game because Pokemon is so big that there isn't really like a medium that it hasn't touched, right? Like they're started with the video games, and there's also an ongoing anime series with that. Like it just never stops. But the card game, which again is still ongoing, different manga, stuff like that, right? There's just like not much that it hasn't touched. And there was even a live action film not too long ago, Detective Pikachu. Really good, actually. I wasn't ready for how good that movie was. But anyway, back to the video games, right? Where it all began. Um, so, right, you have your Pokemon that you get, right? You first start off with one Pokemon, and that Pokemon you get is at level 5, and that Pokemon has stats attached to it. And right, there's already a lot of numbers involved here. But what gets interesting is, as you go on, if you're leveling up that Pokemon, that level changes, it gets higher, and the stats increase, right? And then you're weighing that against other Pokemon that you come across in the game, and then you, as the character, you get 6 Pokemon at any given time, right? Max. So you have to have a team of 6, and you want to see which one is the best to use for a given situation, and maybe which one suits your play style. And what gets interesting about that too is, so you have your different Pokemon with different stats, and each of them get 4 moves max that they have, right? So we're just talking about like the basic level, right? Um, and so just before you get into all the crazy behind the scenes stuff, this is already a lot to consider. And like you do it naturally when you play, so you don't think that you're doing a lot of math, but you're figuring it out because you're like, okay, so, and you're strategizing. You're saying, I can only carry 6 Pokemon. I want to like maybe consider the levels in this, consider their stats with that, because you might have some higher level Pokemon that maybe don't have the best stats, and you want to consider all that. And with those stats, right, you have attack, you have defense, you have speed, you have special attack, special defense, you have your health to consider, and you're weighing that against other Pokemon, and then it gets more interesting because you have types to consider and different types of moves, right? And I'm gonna try to not go too far with this because you could talk about it all day. But if you just like look at, for instance, some Pokemon that had a fire move, right? Like, and how that interacts with, let's say, grass. It's sorry, grass has a weakness to fire, so fire is twice as effective. And so you can have your stats and all, and there's a lot of math that goes on between how much damage you'll do. And I'm sure there's a lot of videos out there that get into that, so that's pretty cool. But so if I do that, I have to consider my stats, but also how much damage is done based on type. And then if I have something like fire versus water, fire is weak to water, and the effects of the attack are less so, right? Like half. So I have to consider that with stats too. And at a certain point, though, if my level's high enough, that doesn't matter as much because I might be doing half the damage. But if my level's so ridiculously high, I'd overpower the Pokemon anyway. So that's something to consider too. And you also want to do resource management when you're dealing with Pokemon, right? You want to say like, well, how many Pokeballs do I have? How many rare candies do I have? And how many stat items do I have? And like how to use those. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it, and we just get used to playing it, so we don't really think about it. But it's kind of insane, and you have to have a good idea of how your character relates to the world around it, right? Because we're looking at the Pokemon world on that screen, and we're like moving throughout it, and you have to have a good sense of how far you're moving and where you're going to and all that. And so I think all that's interesting. And I could honestly talk about the video game all day. But I'll kind of finish with this because I do want to talk about other stuff too. Just that when I was younger, there was a lot of craziness that went into the construction of that game. And I had Pokemon Red. There's a lot of crazy stuff that goes into it, but there was the infamous rare candy glitch. And there's a lot of math behind how it works the way it does. So that's fascinating in its own context. But the idea is like if I put an item in the sixth slot and I went to Viridian City and I talked to like the old man that teaches you how to catch Pokeballs, and then I go to Cinnabar Island and I surf the coast, the side of that, like I can fight like missing number, and then the item would get boosted like ridiculously, and as you can imagine, like it's useful for rare candies, and there was just all sorts of crazy stuff because it's useful for any item, right? But a lot of people used it for rare candies back in the day, and on that coast, right? You just saw all this insanity because you can find like Pokemon outside of like the glitch Pokemon, the Signo, and like some of those Pokemon would have like levels that are over 100, and that's fascinating because their stats aren't necessarily all that, but it's just kind of crazy how it goes. And I think like the max that you can get was like 255, but again, it wasn't as impressive as you'd think. It was just there was a whole lot of wonkiness though. But again, I digress. So there's a lot of crazy stuff in there, and then it's like the card game has a lot of math in it, a lot of things to consider. Like they have the type issues too, and just how different items affect you as well. And it was involved, and I don't think I knew it that well when I was a kid. But I found out more about it as I got older. But all that's pretty interesting. And then when it comes to like just anime, they play it fast and loose with some things, but they still like have to measure things out as they move on, compare different Pokemon to each other, and things along that line. Yeah, so to me, it gets interesting, and I feel like you could talk more about that too. But I also wanted to talk about the creation for a little bit because I do want these videos to not be too long. I want them to be around 10 minutes, so I'm trying not to get too much over that. Just for my own thing, and so when it comes to the creation, if we go back to the games, right, there's a lot of code that goes into that, and a lot of like things that they have to determine through math, like the damage output and the different things that affect that. What affects your stats, which type affects this type more, and which one's neutral, which one does this and which one does that. There's a lot of math behind it, and originally there's a lot of just like crazy code that went behind it. It's just like wild. You can have a field day with it. And as we gone on, it's pretty formulaic in a way, but in a way that kind of works for the franchise because they take what works and then they still add something new to it. And I think that's all interesting, and there's just like so much that goes into the code and so much that goes into like the mechanics of the world and how it works, how like the physics works, how like Pokemon interacting with each other works, and it's just like that's all fascinating to me. And then if you look at the meta level, there's so much to consider there. Like Pokemon makes billions of dollars. It's kind of insane. If you told us back then in the 90s that was going to be the case, I don't think anyone would have believed you. But here it is over 20 years, and it's still making a lot of money. It's because they know what they're doing, and that motivates you. And then when you're actually like buying a Pokemon game, there's something to consider with that too, right? Because like we're all like on a budget, and we have to consider what we want to do. Like, is this going to be worth it? Are we going to get one version? Are we going to get both versions? And for me, it's always one version because like it's so expensive. Like when Pokemon Sword and Shield came out, I got Pokemon Sword. I did not get Shield, and I haven't gotten the DLC yet too because I got a lot out of that game, and yeah, it was great. Um, and again, I don't want this to be too long, but my whole thing is there's a lot of math in Pokemon, and I hope this video helped you see more. But there's so much more than I talked about. I encourage you to discuss it, and feel free to mention anything that I miss because again, there's just so much. Yeah. So I'll see you in the next video. Professor Prime out.